You emphasize the spoken truth and negotiation as the alternative to war, and cite Solzhenitsyn as a brilliant documenter of the potential or inevitable fallout of deceit. But in Solzhenitsyn's diagnosis of the factors leading to the Gulag Archipelago, he also included the failure of people to take a violent stand to disrupt tyranny. And here's a quote. "And how we burned in the camps later, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family? Or if during periods of mass arrests, as, for example, in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and every step on the staircase, but had understood they had nothing left to lose and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. The organs would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt. If we didn't love freedom enough. And even more, we had no real awareness of the situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterwards." End of quote. There appears to be a point where the price of our sovereignty and liberty must be paid with blood in addition to the vulnerability required by the spoken truth. Here are my questions. Do you agree that there is such a point? Or do the weapons and power we possess today make violence an inviolable course of action? Okay, well, I would say, first of all, part of what Solzhenitsyn is talking about actually is the right to self-defense. And you have the right to self-defense. And you have the right to use whatever force is necessary and reasonable when you're defending yourself. And, under the American Constitution, for example, it's predicated on the idea, at least in part, that you have not only the right, but perhaps the moral obligation to resist tyranny. And so, obviously, that's a difference. That's very different from using violence for specifically political ends. Do you have the right to defend yourself against incursions into your own home or into your own family? And I think the answer to that is you do. Part of the reason that it has manifested itself so that being dangerous is the appropriate response. Now, then you might say, well, how do you know how to calibrate your defensive response? And I would say, well, we have some legal guidelines for that. That would be the guidelines governing self-defense in general. I guess maybe it's time for a more aggressive response when you're prepared to pay the price for that more aggressive response. You have to think it through. But you certainly have the right to protect yourself and your family and your property from inappropriate incursion by other individuals or by the state. And without knowing the specifics of any given circumstance that might call for such a response, it's difficult to be any more straightforward about that. But I certainly wouldn't regard myself precisely as a pacifist. Because I believe that it's reasonable to meet, well, how would I say? You have the right to self-defense. That's as clearly as I can formulate it.